It's becoming more and more evident that the US are pushing for a war with China. The reason, however, will surprise you. The answer is the US dollar. It's due to the dominance of the US dollar that the US becomes such a powerful economic nation with a huge military presence across the world. And in this video, I am going to explain why the US are prepared to go to war for it. First, a little bit history of why the US dollar rose to such prominence in the first place. After the end of World War II, the USA controlled around the half of the world's productive capacity. However, devastated by the war, the US allies were not able to pay for the US exports. To solve this problem, the US set up two organizations, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. These two organizations were used to create a global financial framework that in turn gave the US a huge amount of power as the world's creditor under the guise of multilateralism. This in turn established the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Over the coming years, the US budget deficit begins to grow mainly as a result of the massive military spendings it was using to suppress countries around the world, which was seen as an obstacle to the US capital expansions into foreign markets. Now, due to these large budget deficits, gold started flowing back into Europe. So in 1971, the US broke the link between the gold and US dollar. At that time, no countries were willing to call the bluff of the USA, since crashing the dollar would have been devastating to the export industries in surplus countries. Also around the same time, the USA agreed to military support Saudi Arabia and other OPEC countries in exchange for them pricing their oil in US dollars, even further establishing the dollar as the world's dominant currency. Hence, countries like Japan, Germany, and UK had no option but to recycle their excess dollars back into the US by buying up treasuries, thus further solidifying the US dollars as the world's reserve currency. Dollar recycling allowed the Federal Reserve to keep interest rates low, incentivizing the US investors to borrow more, which in turn they lent to developing countries in desperate need of capital by leveraging their near monopoly position on credit. The dominance of the US dollar has meant that the US has been able up until now to keep the rest of the developing world subservient to them, while at the same time extracting much of their resources and giving little back in return. So, what does this all have to do with China, and why does the USA see China as such a threat? Well, as China developed and its economy grew, so did its ability to lend to developing countries. However, China's loan to these developing countries generally came with better terms and did not require those countries to undergo structural adjustments like those loans provided by either the World Bank or the IMF. This alternative source for loans allow a route for these countries to develop without having to be subservient to USA or to feel threatened by the USA. If developing countries are able to build a base level of self-efficiency and freely trade with other countries in their own currencies, then the US dominance will fade away. And this is the reason why China is seen as such an existential threat to the USA. Not because of growing military or because they do not operate a Western-style democracy, and not even because of the West think they will invade Taiwan. It's all because China is a threat to the US dollar dominance and the US financial monopoly. The US campaign to isolate China has been underway for many years as clear signs of the China-led economic alternative emerged around a decade ago. However, recent events have accelerated the timeline for the prospect of war. Firstly, in 2016, China surpassed the USA economy to become the largest economy in the world, when GDP is adjusted for purchasing power and will more than likely suppress the USA in raw GDP terms. Secondly, China and Russia are growing closer by the day, which is something the USA needed, expected, or maybe wanted. Thirdly, China military is fastly reaching near peer status within the US. Considering the huge defense advantage China would have in repelling a US attack, forcing the US to extend their naval forces across the entire Pacific Ocean. Fourthly, BRICS, the SEO, and the BRI, organizations and initiatives that are all about industrialization and infrastructure investment, are quickly gaining traction amongst developing countries. Especially concerning to the USA is the BRICS organization. This is an alliance between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The combined population of these countries is 3.2 billion, which is 42% of the world's population, and the group account of 30% of the world's GDP. Additionally to this, there are many other countries lining up to join BRICS, including Argentina, Indonesia, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Nigeria, Sudan, and numerous others. Having the US dollar as the world's reserve currency has given the US a great deal of leverage over other countries. The US has not shied away from weaponizing the dollar and has imposed dollar sanctions on Iran, Venezuela, Syria, and others. However, the US took dollar weaponization to a whole new level at the start of the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022, when the US illegally froze Russia's sovereign foreign reserves held in US banks. This action was a step too far by the USA, and it's not only a blatant disregard for the international law and norms. A sovereign asset is supposed to be immune from seizure or interference by other countries, but also undermines the trust and stability of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. This has been a wake-up call for many countries who are now rapidly accessing their dollar holding and are seeking alternatives to the US dollar. In recent years, we have seen the Chinese yuan increasing its share of world trade. As a part of its Belt and Road Initiative, China has signed bilateral currency swap agreements with 22 countries and established RMB clearing arrangements in 8. Between January 21 and January 22, settlements in Chinese RMB have doubled in volume to now become the fourth largest account for 3.2% of worldwide settlements. China are also in negotiation with Saudi Arabia with regards to breaking the petrodollar monopoly and looking forward pricing some of their oil contracts in RMB. It is strongly rumored that the BRICS countries are working on creating a new reserve currency based on a basket of their own currency as a way of reducing their dependencies on the US dollar. If BRICS does indeed launch this new currency, and if BRICS is expanded with the new countries that wish to join, then I believe that this new currency will be a serious challenge to the US dollar, as the newly expanded BRICS Plus organization would represent a large share of both the world's trade and the world's resources. The US weaponizing the dollar has effectively shot itself in the foot. The US has currently in excess of $31 trillion of debt. It will also mean that the end of the almost $1 trillion a year military budgets, which keeps the US 800 plus military bases around the world funded and which its empire depend upon. The consequences of the US dollars losing reserve currency status are unprecedented, and this is exactly why the US are using every tool in their box to keep China down, and the only reason they are prepared to go to war with China. The window of opportunity for the US to slow China's rise is rapidly closing, but as this means that the US is really relying itself for inevitable military confrontation, well, that question is for another video. I would sincerely like to hear your comments about this. Thank you.